Welcome to Changing Suits. We're your hosts, Bal
and Taj, discussing the latest news, views, and general life for us Western Asians.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Hi, welcome to Changing Suits. My name's Bal.
And my name's Taj.
We're going to carry on talking about menopause because in the last podcast, we had a really in-depth understanding of what menopause was. But now we wanted to look at a slightly different aspect of menopause because it's such a huge subject. So on today's episode, we've got Jey, who is a nutritional therapist who does specialise in perimenopause as well as menopause. So Jey, could you give us a bit of an introduction? What got you interested in specialising in this topic?
Yeah, hi to both of you, Bal and Taj. Thank you for inviting me to speak about perimenopause and menopause. I'm really passionate about this because the reason I started to work in this is because I'm in that phase myself, and I know how I want to feel growing older. And I don't want it to be doom and gloom. We're in this age, and so it's kind of like, knocking on the doors of our grave, because that's how our ancestors were about 100 years ago, but it's not the case anymore. We still have so many more decades of life left, and if we're not taking care of ourselves, those decades can be really quite horrible. And
just out of interest, I mean, it is interesting because obviously as women do come to perimenopause and they know that they're starting to knock on the menopause door, it does become a bit of a scary thing of, oh my god.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I completely understand what you're saying is, we need to change the perspective there.
We definitely need to change the perspective, and I think it really begins with education. I mean, for me, I went into perimenopause and I didn't even know that word 10 years ago.
Jey, I'm going to jump into this because I think it's the best point for me to jump in. So I was sending you some communication emails and stuff like that, and I wrote premenopause.
Yes.
Thinking innocently it was premenopause, and you were like, no, it's perimenopause. Oh, okay. I just thought it was a bit of a play on words.
It's the education, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then you explained there's a pre, peri, and the menopause, and I was like, oh wow, okay, so I was right in some aspect. I suppose I was just making myself feel better, but yes.
Pre is before peri. Perimenopause is the transition towards menopause, and menopause is literally that one day when you haven't had a period for 12 months and you go into menopause, and then immediately afterwards it's actually you're in postmenopause. So they are the four different phases, if you like. But when we say menopause, technically, it's just that one moment when we haven't had a period for 12 months, and then we are technically in menopause. And collectively, we may think of it as a menopause journey. So even when we're in perimenopause, a lot of women may think, okay, I'm in my menopause phase now, which is not incorrect, but there are these technical terms put in place so that we can understand it better. Does that make sense?
See, so I'm perimenopausal. Is
right.
That right? Yep.
Yes.
And the first thing that struck in my mind was, oh my God, I can't have, not that I wanted kids anymore, but the first thing I was like, okay, I can't have kids anymore. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. We are still fertile in perimenopause, but it is the end of our reproductive phase in our life. So there's a couple of things going on there. You may hear of women becoming really teary and experiencing grief and sadness because it's the end of our reproductive years. But it doesn't mean we can't get pregnant, because we're still ovulating, we're still producing hormones, and we're still having a period. So you still can get pregnant, but you're less fertile.
I mean, just in regards to something you said earlier, you were going through it, which is why it really was why you want to specialize in it. Can I just understand, because you are a nutritional therapist. And
yes.
So prior to your menopause, were you doing all types of nutrition that you'd look at, or what was your journey?
My journey was, I was actually working in IT before nutritional therapy, And I knew that was never my passion. So when I had massive life changes, and I've been reading about a lot about this today, actually, in a book, where it can be a time when we come to this phase of perimenopause, so many things are happening. There's so many hormonal changes that it can be the end of a relationship. It can be, that's one of the most prevalent things that happen, that we kind of go into a different phase in ourselves. And that's what happened to me. It was the end of relationship for me. I found myself on my own. I was really at the depth of my despair. I was in such a black hole at this stage. I was about 41, 42. And of course, we have to take personal responsibility for what happens in our life. But I know a lot of it now, I know a lot of it was probably instigated by all these hormonal imbalances that were happening, because this is the biggest hormonal balance phase of our life. We have several different phases in our life when we go through imbalances, like menarche, which is when we start our period, pregnancy. But this is the biggest one that has the most influence and impact on our lives.
On that point, why would you say, compared to the other two phases that you've just mentioned, when you start your period and then pregnancy, why would you say this is the biggest in that case?
Because it is the end of our reproductive phase. We've gone through a lifetime of, so many things happening to us in our lives. And it's a time when, so in menarche, which is when we start our periods, our estrogen and progesterone are starting to be produced. But when it comes to the end of this, there is a lot of so many different emotions that happen, more than when we are going through pregnancy and menarche. When you're actually being depleted of these hormones, it has a bigger impact than when they're just fluctuating a bit, like when you are in menarche and pregnancy.
I'm really surprised to hear that this is the biggest change. But then I can understand what you're saying as well, because I feel down at times, and I'm like, I don't know why I feel down at times.
Yeah,
And you're all over the place, and you feel sad about things, and you can't quite point why you feel sad about things.
exactly.
And is that what is maybe the cause of breakdown of relationships, do you think? Because the other person doesn't
Yeah.
understand, you don't understand, so you're in this new world where no one understands what's going on.
Absolutely, yeah. We don't understand what's going on within us. If we haven't been educated, like at the age of 41, 42, I didn't know what was happening within me. So how can I communicate to anybody else that this is what I'm feeling, this is what's happening inside of me? So then there's so much miscommunication. Everything gets completely distorted. And I can say in my life, I felt like I started to go into destruction mode. So, and the other reason, going back to what you said, Bal, about why is because it lasts the longest. Pregnancy is a few months. Then you can come back to some kind of normalcy afterwards. Maybe there's postpartum depression, but you can get help for that. And you identify that that's postpartum depression, and you can get help. When you go into perimenopause, which can happen anytime from about 35, you don't even know that's what's happening to you. And so it causes so much confusion.
What made you, because like you said, you were very down at 41 and you'd gone through life-changing decisions.
Yeah.
What helped in making you realize what was going on?
It was a nutrition. To be absolutely honest with you, I was doing a lot of yoga. As I was doing yoga, it started to change the way I was eating. And that had a massive impact on how I started to feel about myself and how I was feeling about my surroundings, my relationships. And it started to make me heal and become stronger. And one thing led to another, and I realized that if nutrition and yoga can, I was kind of at the precipice of these two. Shall I go down the yoga route or the nutrition? But I found that, I think for me at that time, I realized that nutrition and natural methods and natural remedies and holistic therapies had always been with me throughout my life. And I just hadn't noticed it. It had always been there right under my nose. And I felt that yoga, yes, maybe one day I can, train and become a yoga teacher. But right now, I'm finding that nutrition is having a massive impact on me. And so then I went to study nutritional therapy, and it helped with so many things. I had really bad acne. I had so many different hormonal imbalances. At the time, I didn't even know what that word meant either, that phrase, hormonal imbalance. But I had acne, I had endometriosis. So we can find a pattern. If we look back in our earlier life, if we've had these kind of, acne and endometriosis and fibroids and things like that, which are caused by hormonal imbalances, and we're educated and we know and we're informed, we may understand, okay, perimenopause may hit us quite badly. So let's start taking care of ourselves better.
Ooh, that's interesting. Especially the
Yeah.
acne bit, because I had very bad acne when I was younger.
Yeah.
So-
It's a hormonal imbalance.
So where you've said you can sort of understand how bad perimenopause can be dependent on your journey there.
Yeah.
Can you just elaborate a bit more on what that means and why it could be worse for some people and why not so bad for some people?
Okay, so there's several things. Genetics can play a part. So how your mothers, your sisters, your aunts, how they actually handled menopause can play quite a big part. How your periods were when you were younger can play quite a big part as well. And how you're looking after yourself nutritionally. So if you have quite a bad diet, you're not exercising, we're not doing things mindfully, for example, we're not looking at how, if we're getting stressed, how are we dealing with that? If we're not looking at all these different aspects, it can hit us a lot worse than somebody who actually is taking care of themselves
So
in
it could
this
make
way.
it faster, almost, the process. Could that be said,
It
or is
can
it?
make it, but it can exacerbate the symptoms.
Okay.
That's what it can do. Faster is normally reliant on genetics. Like when did your mum get it? When did your sister get it? But your symptoms are really about your lifestyle, because I don't know if you know, but genetics can actually only make up 5% of what's happening within you. Epigenetics, which is your environment, is 95%. It's like, if somebody has diabetes and they say, well, my parents had it, so I'm definitely going to get it, and they don't make any changes, then they will get it because they've completely relied on their genetics. But if they change their environment, start exercising, start changing their diet, they don't have to get diabetes.
Which makes sense, because you can't just say
Yeah.
everything's genetics and just leave it to
No.
that and change nothing in your life.
Exactly.
You have a certain amount of control to do
Yes.
something about it.
Absolutely. But
Very
you'd be
interesting.
surprised.
No, but when it isn't pointed out to you, you kind
You
of
don't
just
know.
you don't realize and you don't know.
The other thing I was going to mention actually is because obviously we specialize in taboo subjects within the South Asian community, and just something that you've mentioned, as we know, we don't tend to talk about menopause as a community, even outside of the South Asian community, menopause is just not discussed. But even more, it becomes even more restricted within the South Asian community. So firstly, if we're having those discussions, like you've said, with our mothers, our sisters, our aunts, how was your menopause? What did you go through? That gives you a slight insight into what you'd perhaps go
Yeah,
through. But the other
exactly.
thing is where you've said dealing with stress, again, going back to stressful situations, many of them, whether it's medical, whether it's divorced, again, goes back to we don't discuss these situations.
We don't.
So it's an
Yeah.
interesting way of looking at it, of actually these, again, going back to it, we do need to discuss these subjects, whether it's menopause, whether it's other stress related things, because it will impact our health later, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all about communication. One other point that I wanted to make, because we were talking about what can make perimenopause worse or what can make it feel worse within somebody, is also say we've had sleep issues in the past, or we deal with stress really badly in the past. And if we haven't taken care of that in perimenopause, all these symptoms that are associated with it, like skin issues, like eczema, things like that, they can come up almost like for a calling. It's almost like in your face.
Oh
That's
no!
what can happen.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Be warned. Oh
But
God.
I find that really empowering, instead of feeling that this is a struggle, because it's actually coming up for us to look at, to process, to deal with. And these can be things that we have just like smothered, brushed under the carpet, not dealt with for decades and decades. And now it's coming up for us to say, okay, what do I do about this now? Where can I get help, or how do I make this situation better? That's what it can do.
Do you think that might be the reason why we get to a certain age and we start reflecting back at our lives, because we have
Yeah,
all these, because I never thought about it before, but now you're saying that, we start looking back at our lives and saying, okay, I'm not going to handle this anymore, I'm not going to be
yeah,
under stress, because we're having that body change and the hormone change.
exactly.
Oh, now I'm thinking maybe I'm going through it as well.
No, that's a real
This
eye
is a problem
opener.
when we talk about something.
There's a real eye opener, to be honest.
Mm,
It makes sense why people reflect back at their lives and think, okay, I'm not going to take this anymore.
yeah, exactly. And that's why the relationship issues, because you think, I'm not putting up with this rubbish anymore.
Looking at, again, the fact that you do look at nutrition specifically, before you go through perimenopause, you've said that obviously everything that you do lifestyle wise will have an impact on how your experience is with
Yeah,
perimenopause. We all know we should eat healthy. You know, from day one,
yes.
you're like, eat healthy, have your 5 fruits a day, which might have gone up to what, 7 or 8, according to
Yeah.
guidelines, whenever the guidelines change. But what is the advice out there to help your perimenopause experience in regards to nutrition?
There's because there's so much more coverage about this, much more awareness. I think there's a lot more information available to people as well. So if people did want to go on and see what kind of food that we should be eating, I think that's quite easy to find nowadays, in terms of like anti-inflammatory, because we can have, if we're gaining weight, for example, just to pick one symptom, um, one of the things can be that we have a lot of processed food in our lives. And in the past, our bodies can metabolize it and it hasn't been an issue and it hasn't caused us any problems. But when you come into menopause and your estrogen is declining, that then has an impact on how we process the fat that we're eating. So it's about looking at the different types of food that we're having and bringing it more back into balance. So anti-inflammatory foods, what works for some people doesn't always work for everybody. That's the problem with the internet as well. You can get general information, but everybody's body is very different. We're bio individuals, and what works for one person doesn't. Or we may look at, okay, fasting is really good, for example, but it may not work for everybody, because that can also cause hormonal imbalances. So I would say that there is information out there. It's going to be generic, but if you go to somebody who has more knowledge, you will get what is specific for you as a person. And I think at this age, this is what we really want, somebody who can help us uh, and cater just for us, so that we know we're doing the right things rather than guessing, because there's 100 million things available on the internet and you'll just be picking at things saying, okay, maybe this can help, maybe that can help. One thing I definitely do not advise is going on diets.
See, I was going to hit on that because when we talk processed foods, pretty much everything in our lives is processed. We can
Yeah.
get away from it, but it's hard to get away from it. So when someone says to me, avoid processed foods, does that mean not having packets of crisps, not having anything processed, not having jars of sauce for pasta or something like that? Is that what it means to start
it
cutting out processed foods?
Okay, so
That's
there's
a
two
good question. I
things.
was going to say that's an
Yeah,
excellent
it's a good
question. I've never
question.
thought
Thank
about it
you. I'll
actually.
take that.
Yeah. There's two things with that. In nutrition, we always say if it has more than 5 ingredients, try and avoid it. We can't avoid everything. Okay, we live in a world where it's like, we're going out and about, we want to eat in places, and we've got really busy lives as well. It is possible to eat healthy, but on the odd occasion, and if it's the odd occasion and you're going to have something that's processed, that's okay. Your body can handle that. Your body has to be able to handle a certain amount of stress, and eating that kind of food is stress on your body. But it's when you're eating it every single day or quite often. Say you're having jars of food 3 to 4 times a week, that's a lot. So this is what we're saying about bringing everything into balance. It doesn't mean cutting it out completely. I'm not when I work with clients, I don't say you have to cut this out completely, depending on what their nutritional needs are. If they have a gluten intolerance, then yeah, definitely you've got to cut out gluten, right? if they don't have a gluten intolerance, I don't say you should come off gluten because it's healthier for you. We find a balance. We find, okay, let's avoid it, and what amount works for you as an individual.
So it isn't diet per se, like the diets that we hear about, just eat this and just eat that, because eventually
No,
they break and you break out of the habit of doing that. So you're not
absolutely.
advising to go on a diet. It's
No,
just
not
shape.
at all. Yeah. And when you work with nutrition, it's not just about telling people what to eat, because if that's what I did, then you may as well go and do it, take a diet, right? Do a diet. So it's very much about the emotional needs of that person as well. Like we said, we're going through so many changes in our life when we come into this phase. If I just spoke to that person about diet, don't eat this, they have no understanding about themselves.
It's
So
interesting.
we,
I mean, what
yeah,
you've just said, it is the emotion behind it. I remember when I was pregnant, I had gestational diabetes, but I wanted to eat that chocolate. I did.
yeah, yeah,
And no matter what happened, even though I knew it, I still wanted. And it's the same thing, well, even more from what you're saying when you're hitting the perimenopause and menopause, where it's like, well, if you say no, you're not allowed that chocolate, and you're like, I need to eat that chocolate.
yeah,
It's not going to happen.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
interesting.
so that's why I never say to anybody, okay, you're not going to eat this anymore. It is, let's see what your nutritional needs are. What is your body actually craving? It's not necessarily craving that chocolate, it's craving nutritionally rich food. And if that person is given nutritionally rich food, their dependency on the chocolate, on the coffee, on the tea starts to decrease. So I don't need to say to you, have less coffee. You will start to have less coffee because your nutritional needs are being met.
That's like if you eat healthy and all of a sudden you eat, I don't know, it's like a crisp packet, you feel not right, you feel disgusting.
Yeah,
So it's almost like working like that. And again,
exactly.
sometimes you just need it pointed out and you're like, oh, yes, that rings
Yeah,
a bell. I understand what you mean.
yeah. You need it pointed out. Exactly.
In regards to as you move on from the perimenopause, prior to perimenopause, and we've obviously spoken about what is it that your body needs, and it has to be specialized to an individual. Is there a difference between the diet that you'd suggest before the perimenopause and then within the perimenopause, or would you say that's
It can be, there is a difference actually, because when we're in perimenopause, we focus more on phytoestrogenic foods, for example, because it mimics estrogen, it sits on the estrogen receptors. And beforehand, you don't, it's part of um, the word diet is so misused, I find, but it's part of a healthier diet to have beforehand, before perimenopause. But when you're in perimenopause, I think it becomes even more important to focus on foods like that.
and then how about then when you've hit, I know menopause you've said is pretty much the day that you've hit that
Yeah,
12 month, and
yeah.
then would you say what would happen there then? Again, is there a big difference in
The
nutrition?
food is similar to, actually, the type of foods that you would eat are similar to perimenopause in menopause.
Okay. And then post, I know I'm going through each stage, but I'm just
Yeah,
throughout the whole
menopause
thing.
is just that one day or those few hours, right? So post-menopause and perimenopause are quite similar.
Okay. And is that based on where you've said your estrogen is going down? Would you then
Yes.
be looking for foods that are estrogen rich, for example? Or how does
You
that
can,
work?
yeah, you can do. So it also depends on your symptoms. But what I find is once you have that nutrient rich diet, things start to balance out. In terms of your emotions, in terms of your physical wellness as well. So um, you, yeah, I guess having phytoestrogenic foods is very, very helpful in this stage.
Is that then to increase the amount of estrogen in your body? Is that how it works then?
It it mimics estrogen.
Okay.
So, and because it sits on the estrogen receptors, your body takes it in as if it's estrogen.
Ah, got you. Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Right. How long did you personally find? I know this is a bit of a harder question perhaps to specify. When you started on your journey about looking at nutrition and obviously changing your own diet, plus the fact that you were doing yoga, how long
Yeah.
did it take you to sort of see the difference in your own journey between what you were going through when you were 41, where you were a bit down, to
Mm.
then maybe coming out and actually saying, oh, wow, this is making a difference to me and my body?
It was probably a couple of years that it took me because I was not guided by anybody. I went to study nutrition. I didn't go to heal my perimenopause symptoms because I didn't know that was what was happening within me, right? So I went on a healing journey, really. I studied nutrition, which started to change the way I was eating. I was doing yoga as well. And then anything that had the word healing on it, like healing circle or crystal healing or anything, I was there. I was like a moth to a flame, basically, because I knew that I needed that healing within me because I was really, really in quite a bad place. I can say I was on the verge of depression. I went to the doctors. I was offered antibiotics, no, antidepressants. But as I said to you before, I always veered towards natural methods. I knew that that wasn't going to work for me, and not everybody does. Not everybody knows that it won't work, so people will take the antidepressants and it will make them feel even worse because it doesn't help when you have a hormonal imbalance. It may help in a clinical depression but not for hormonal imbalances. So I declined the antidepressants, but this healing journey was just incredible for me, really. So yeah, a couple of years,
I
I'd
was going to
say.
say, I've got a few questions now lined up in my head. What I was going to say in regards to, because this was picked up on the previous podcast where we did discuss menopause, and the problem is the fact that obviously doctors don't look at the menopause being one of the reasons for this. I suppose less so. I suppose the awareness is being raised, which is why you are offered things like the antidepressants.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's what happened in your case as well, but are you finding from your clients that that perhaps is changing and doctors aren't going straight for the antidepressants? They are opening their eyes and saying, actually, this is the menopause, the effects of menopause.
I think it's still happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think antidepressants are still being given. Less so because I think Davina McCall, what she did was pretty amazing. Whether you both watched that, I don't know. But I think that's raised a lot of awareness. And I think more doctors are actually going for training right now. But I'm still seeing you can't get an appointment at the doctor's anyway. It's becoming quite impossible. Where a year ago I could call, and I need a blood test myself at the moment, actually. I could call and I could get a blood test done. I have been calling for 4 days now. There's no answer. So really what's happened is I think more people are calling the doctors, but just not getting any response at all. So we
Which is
have,
why we need to educate ourselves, and this is why we
yeah,
decided to
exactly.
do a few episodes on menopause, because it's not something that we should take lightly. It's a life-changing event
Yeah,
for that person.
exactly.
The other thing I wanted to ask was, obviously, when you were going through your low phase,
Hmm.
how did your family react in regards to the whole thing, and
That's
what
a
was
good
your reaction?
question. Well, my life turned upside down. Okay, like completely upside down. I moved out, and so I found it really difficult to talk about this with anybody at the time. I was really, really struggling, and this is when I started to seek healers because I needed somebody who was non-judgmental, who wasn't going to make the situation worse than it already was. And in that situation, I felt that I didn't need the opinions of well-meaning family and friends, but I needed somebody who was going to really help me heal. So I cut myself off from everybody.
Oh,
Do you,
wow.
do you think
Yeah.
that helped you cutting yourself off from
Yeah, it
everybody?
really did. I didn't cut myself off from my parents, but literally everybody else, for about a year, I hardly saw anybody. I just needed that time for myself, and I was in too much grief to be able to socialize and seek the help of somebody and go over the same thing again and again. So I just kind of took myself off the grid. I was working, but other than that,
I think that's so good because you realised that you needed that time out. You couldn't take anyone else's load. You
no.
needed to deal with your own things. And I
Yeah,
think that in itself is an amazing and big thing to realise I need to sort out myself before I can support
yeah,
anyone else.
exactly. I had a healer actually, and she said to me, when you talk about this situation with lots of different people, you actually give it energy, and you collude to make that issue bigger than it actually is. So go inward. And this is what I do with my clients now as well. I help them go inward rather than, I'm not saying cut yourself off from everybody like I did. I'm not saying that at all. That was what was working for me at that time because I didn't know what else to do. If the same thing was to happen now, I may behave completely differently, right? So, but on my programs with my clients, I make sure that emotional aspect is dealt with, that they understand how they can find this healing within themselves, because I've done so much work on that.
Do you think that, I suppose I want to see a bit of a comparison as to how you'd react now and compared to before. Do you think that the problem was that your family perhaps didn't understand the menopause, which is what you were going through, whereas now you'd be in a situation where you could help explain it better? Is that
think
correct?
so. Yeah. I could communicate better. I could, well, I do now, obviously, because I'm still in perimenopause. But like 9 years later, I'm still in perimenopause. It can last for years.
Oh no!
Well, don't say that. Taj is about to cry.
But it doesn't have to be a bad experience. It can be that, yes, it's lasted for this long, but it doesn't have to be bad. I'm in a really good place now. So I'm in perimenopause, but in a good place. Okay.
And the fact that you're smiling when you say that
Yeah,
says it all,
it's
I
true.
think. Yeah, no, that's brilliant.
But I know where to go for help. I know that this is happening within me, whereas at that stage, I didn't know it was perimenopause. I didn't know it could be hormonal imbalances. And I think I could have dealt with it differently. Still would have separated. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind about that. But I could have dealt with all the other aspects differently. Yeah.
So, say if you were to advise someone similar in your situation and say how they can ask people to offer them support, if that made sense, what
Yeah.
would you advise them?
I would say, first of all, seek advice from somebody who's a professional in whatever way that speaks to you, either therapy in terms of like coaching therapy or a spiritual healer, whatever speaks to you, nutritional therapy, and secondly, try and communicate with your family members as well and say, this is what's happening. Because if you can get yourself educated, then you can explain to them. If we don't know what's happening, then we can't explain to them. If we understand from about the age of 40, this can start happening, and we start reading on, okay, what are the symptoms? Are these symptoms within me now? Yes, they are. Okay. So let's have this conversation with them and say, this is what's happening. I need support. How can we work through this together so that we can stay as a unit and help each other? I can help you and you can help me too. And I think that is the first stages of acknowledging it within yourself, because I think a lot of women would also go into denial about, it still feels like, okay, this is like old age, perimenopause, menopause, that happens to old people. So it can still feel like, no, this isn't happening to me. But if we can get over the fact that it's not something that happens to old people, 40 is young, but we can actually empower ourselves and embrace it and become, have this. I was reading today where this author was saying they did some studies and they found that there are women in their lifetimes can have 3 different careers. And do you know when the first one starts?
At
In their
40?
30s and 40s.
Well,
Sorry, what did you
interesting.
say?
I said 40s, I'm assuming, because
Yeah.
yeah.
Mine started at 40. I barely had a career before that. The second one can be in your 50s and 60s, and your third one can be in your 70s.
That's really interesting. Very interesting.
So prior to that, we're just getting through the days, taking the
Possibly,
pages.
yeah.
Do you think because we've become more focused, like we were saying previously, and realize who we are and start questioning ourselves, and that's
Yes.
why the careers happen at those
I
different
think so.
stages and later?
Yeah.
It's aligning your values to what you actually want to progress with, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
Prior to that.
Exactly. Well, it's aligning yourself with who you are finally, isn't it? You're just starting to understand yourself. I can't say I understood anything about myself in my 20s and 30s.
That is a question that I've going on to a different thing. You've just triggered something in my mind actually, because I've been thinking about that on another subject. But what the other thing I was going to ask is, you've obviously mentioned healers and that path that you took. Can you maybe talk to us about this? Because again, it's very new. You mentioned crystals. That was the other question I was going to
Yeah.
ask you, because I'm not ever delved into that. But now you've mentioned it, can you explain a bit about it and how it helped you, if it
Yeah.
helped you?
Oh, it definitely did. Definitely. When I was going through this, I said to you that I went to the doctors and they gave me the antidepressants, or they offered me it. They also offered me counseling. So I had 6 sessions of counseling, but it was very unhelpful. It was very much on the level of the mind and situations. Okay, how can we help you through this situation? And I think by that stage I'd already started to work with a healer who had started to get me to think differently about looking at things from a different perspective, not looking at the situation but looking at the feelings behind it. And when did this happen? When was the first time this happened? Then you start understanding yourself a lot better. Okay, it's not just about that situation per se, because that situation has repeated itself throughout your life until you heal it. So when I started working with people like that, I knew that the counseling wasn't working for me. So I already had a comparison. So this gave me a really good ground to work off. And I knew, okay, this is the type of person that I resonate with, and that's really helping me understand and get to the core of me. So, and then that led on to different things like, angel healing and crystal healing and things like that. And I use crystals, even now I will use crystals. I've got them on my desk. I really believe they have energy and they have different purposes. Yeah, I don't use them so much in my practice unless somebody is kind of talking about that. Then I will say, okay, why don't you get this crystal? I'm not an expert in crystals at all, but I resonate with the crystal energy.
And the reason I ask is, again, like I said, I've not ever delved into it, but it's always an interesting one because you always hear about crystals, and I just wanted to ask,
Yeah,
I was like, oh, crystals, let's find out about this a bit. But again, it is what you said; it has to resonate with you. Some people,
yeah,
the counselling will help because they need to get something off the chest, and it makes
exactly.
sense. So
Yeah,
it's really important. Going back to what you said earlier, it's an individual journey that
definitely.
you have to explore. The other thing I wanted to say is, obviously, we've spoken about raising awareness. And like I said, we specialize in looking at the South Asian culture and the taboos around that. Now, yes, you can have those conversations perhaps with your mum, with your sisters, but how do we open that conversation up? Because obviously, many of these subjects have to be discussed with, partners or
Mm,
fathers or sons. How would
yeah,
you suggest, and with the fact that you are now on better terms with family,
yeah.
what would you say is the best way to open the discussion beyond the women in our lives?
Beyond the women to the men in our lives as well. It's starting small, like not shocking them with, facts and things like that. But I think just if you have a good relationship, say with your children and with your parents, I guess to some extent, but we're talking more about our immediate family, like our spouses, when we're trying to get that support. It would be having smaller conversations. Like I said, not anything too shocking at the beginning because it's very new for them as well, but just saying, these are my symptoms, this is what I'm getting. You can also, point them in direction of different podcasts, for example, and say, just learn a little bit about this because this does affect everybody in our family. And if you need more help, for example, in terms of chores around the house or, whatever it may be, asking for that help. I think women are such martyrs, aren't we? We've got to do everything. And I've got aunts and, all sorts of people who just want to take on everything themselves, but then they'll complain about it, right? Because they can't do everything.
I was going
Why
to
do we
say,
want?
we all do that. Surely we all do that. That's a
I mean,
normal
that's
thing.
what I done. I must admit, I done that this weekend. I was like, I'm going to clean all the cupboards in the kitchen, upstairs, everywhere. And I thought, I'm dying here. Kids,
Yeah,
you need to help me.
I heard the complaint as well. I was like, okay, turn the phone off. No.
And I got my kids to help me, and my
Yeah.
husband saw
Yeah,
that I was just
great.
suffering, and he pitched in, which was a shocker. But yeah, you're right. You need to ask for that help
You
when it's
need to
needed.
ask, because what happens is when we don't ask for the things that we need and we don't get that support, we become really frustrated, and then we want them to be mind readers. Like we take it on and then we're getting really annoyed because they're not fulfilling our expectation. Our expectations can never be fulfilled.
And Taj has got a massive grin on her face, so you know that's exactly what's happening in her household. Her poor husband.
So this opening up of these channels of communication is really, really important, because otherwise it doesn't matter how many other marriages you have as well, you'll just go down the same line. So I'm married again, and my second marriage is completely different because we communicate on everything. Something is bothering us, we will make sure that we're talking about it. And he's like completely on, um, with me with the perimenopause and supportive and helps out and all that kind of stuff as well. And I think it's really important.
How do you find that with your clients? Do you tend to have many South Asian women that
I
do
do.
come? Good.
I
Okay.
do.
And so do you
Yeah,
think it's a subject that is starting to open up in the South Asian community? Because although we're saying it's a
definitely.
taboo subject, perhaps there is some movement.
Yeah. A while ago, I went to a menopause cafe actually, and there were mainly South Asian, and they were crying because this is like one of the spaces where you could come and be honest and talk about what's happening. And many of them hadn't ever opened up before that day, and so they were contemplating whether they should go, whether this is good for them, whether they can be honest and talk about this. And then when they came, they were so glad they did, because it meant that they weren't this was a non-judgmental place. They could open up and talk about these things without feeling victimized. That's also really important. You don't want to feel like a victim. And yeah, so I'm finding that more and more women are wanting to talk about it.
That's amazing.
Good.
Yeah.
I was going to say, as we come to the end of this episode, I know you've given a bit of advice in regards to what to do, but where the fear I would have thought coming into this whole process is the fact that you don't know about it. What advice would you give someone who is a bit unsure and is scared about the fact and is thinking, oh my God, this is the end of my reproductive
Mm.
journey? What advice would you give them?
I would say there's lots of free resources online. So if you're getting these symptoms, um, it's better to speak to somebody, because it can be a minefield. You start putting in some symptoms and then it will come out with something completely to make you completely scared and terrified. So you have to be really mindful about not doing that. There are free places that you can go to, like menopause cafes are popping up everywhere, which are amazing. I run one myself in Ilford. It's something that's run on a monthly basis. It's a safe space to come and speak to somebody, and then you can talk about what your symptoms are and start to understand. So I'd always say, try to speak to a person. Don't go down the rabbit hole of looking everything up online, because that can be really scary. I've had so many people come to me say, I started to Google it and then I got scared because it was, you're looking up, have I got perimenopause, and it's going on to something else. And then you're just going to get really worried about it. So, yeah, speak to somebody is what I would say. Find out where these places are. There's loads of webinars as well. I run webinars, but there's loads of other people who run webinars as well. Get yourself educated, informed, see what's happening. There are so many things like this that are happening, and educate yourself.
The main thing is communication, it sounds like.
Yeah,
Everyone need,
definitely.
everyone needs to lean on someone, and someone that's going through the same experience. Surely that can't be a bad thing, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Jay. It's been enlightening. Any time that I we learn about something, it does open our eyes to it. And this is what this podcast is about. We're talking about a range of subjects. And I'm just happy that I'm sitting here thinking, oh, when I do hear it, I'll have someone to talk to about this. And
Absolutely.
be aware of it.
Come along, and you can attend things and we can discuss stuff, and you'll see that it's not it doesn't have to be scary, it doesn't have to be struggle. It can actually be really, really wonderful.
Perfect. Thanks so much for your time, Jey.
No problem. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
That's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.